The Florida LGBTQ Democratic Caucus asks, why LGBTQ but the T is silent? At the recent gathering of the Florida LGBTQ Democratic Caucus, the state's largest gathering of LGBTQ political activists offered a state of the state on trans rights. Queer News Tonight covered this special program called LGBTQ but the T is silent. The program was moderated by Nikole Parker, the Director of Transgender Equality at Equality Florida. Panelists included Carvelle Estriplet, Wehle and Abbie Aldridge. Watch this.
Good. Well, once again, my name is Nikole Parker, pronoun she, her, hers, and I am the Director of Transgender Equality for Equality Florida. And I'm super excited to be sharing space with you today. So the title of this is LGBTQ, but the T is silent. And I know some folks may be like, well, what does that mean? I often say in that acronym, the T is silent. And what I mean by that is, I feel a lot of the times when it's time to fight or when it's time to stand up, the trans community is the first one there to do whatever we can. But as we know, in 2021, it was the deadliest year on record for trans individuals with 53 plus murders. And oftentimes I feel like, where's my community? And by no means do I mean the whole community, but I feel like a lot of people kind of turn a blind eye to trans issues. So today's panel, we're going to just be talking about what it's like to be trans and some of the experiences that we have. So I want to have our panelists introduce themselves, so I'm going to throw it to Carvelle.
Hey, good morning, everyone. My name is Carvelle Estriplet. I go by the pronouns she, hers, and hers. I'm the owner of Carvelle Bikes. I'm also the Regional 8 Director for this caucus. And also I'm on the Wilton Manors Community Fair Advisory Board. And I'm glad to be here.
Awesome, thank you.
Hello, everybody. Good morning. My name is Lucas Wehle. I use he, him, his pronouns, and I'm a trans man. I came out in the Tampa Bay area about like 12 or so years ago, and there really wasn't a lot of resources around. So I helped create the resources that exist here today. I worked at Metro Inclusive Health and created all of their trans programs for about 6 years, and now I work in diversity, equity, and inclusion. Thanks for having me.
Good morning, lovely people. It's so nice. Can I just say, it's so nice to be up here and see all of your smiling faces. Everybody's open. It's fantastic. My name's Abbie Aldridge. My pronouns are they, them. I'm a mental health therapist operating here out of Largo. I did my student internship at Metro Inclusive Health, and I'm involved in the local community.
Awesome. Well, thank you all so much. So I'm going to start with you, Carvelle. Can you talk about your journey to living authentically?
Oh, wow. Like they say, everyone has their own story. Well, it's going to be 12 years. It's going to be 12 years since I started on this journey. But I feel like it's longer than that. I mean, I always tell people I have like two coming out stories. Like when I could say we can go back 20 years. Yes, I'm dating myself. When I first came out, like thinking that I was gay, but the whole time, I mean, I knew I was trans and things like that. But as far as the difficulties, that's the thing I want to focus on. The difficulties of living your authentic self, which is being trans, being non-binary, just being who yourself are, is dealing with stuff like as far as getting work and shelter and just this. It's the things that we all struggle with, but times it by 1,000 times worse. So for me, like, I remember even going back, I'll use my experience working in the bike industry. When I started working at Performance Bikes, I had to prove myself that I was a mechanic. And the reason I'm using that is not because I proved it by the bike, just to prove that I was a valid person. You should employ me. And I don't want to sound like I'm rambling on, but I'm just saying employment, shelter, those are things that like I had difficulty acquiring from. And that's why I added that.
No, thank you so much for sharing that. I don't think people understand that when it comes to trans and non-binary people, especially when it comes to shelters, a lot of folks would rather sleep on the street than go to a shelter. Yeah. So think about that. Think about you have an opportunity to go somewhere, but you would rather be on the street than face the discrimination that you could possibly face in shelters. And a lot of the policies and procedures in shelters are not up to date. They are not inclusive of people like me. So, that's one huge gap that we have amongst many, and especially when it comes to getting work as well. Florida's a right to work state. And even though certain counties and certain areas do have protections, there are people who will deny you a job because you're trans. There have been times that in the beginning of my transition where my identity documents weren't changed, and I'll never forget, I went in for the interview and everything went fine, but when it was time to show those, they looked at that, looked at me, looked at that, looked at me, and were like, well, we'll give you a call. And I never got that call. And, like I tell people all of the time, there's a lot of stigma around survival sex work and things like that, but if someone can't work, that doesn't mean that their stomachs aren't still hungry. That doesn't mean that they're gonna stop living. So at the end of the day, these are just a few of the disparities, and I thank you so much for bringing that up.
Yeah, can I just add on too,
Yeah.
like what you just said, like housing, like I just read a story a couple days ago, like there's the New York City Housing Authority have a shelter specifically for trans individuals. And this shelter, basically named after Marsha P. Johnson, has terrible conditions. And this is a nonprofit that's supposed to help us. So when like I said, what we can do for the trans community, it's all the basic needs. And when I heard that story about that, this is a nonprofit named after Marsha P. Johnson, a trans icon, and they have terrible, horrible conditions. They have people who have a shelter. If you have a shelter, an animal, like a service animal, they would deny you in there like that. There was all the residents or on there were getting stigmatized and being attacked. So yeah, this ain't shelter. It's everything.
Absolutely. So Lucas, what was your journey to living authentically?
Yeah, so the biggest hurdle I had in coming out was I came out about 12 years ago as well. So, and when I came out before that, I had come out as just, I guess, a lesbian liking women, and that alone was shunned, and I wasn't allowed to talk about it. And it was a big deal in my church, and my mom literally just said, do not talk about this. Wouldn't accept or acknowledge that I was, had a girlfriend or anything like that. And then when I came out, when I moved out, I waited until I moved out because I knew I would probably be either kicked out or even worse. So my family really rejected that for almost 7 years, and to the point where when I graduated college, I was doing this work, being paid to do this work, creating resources that we needed and that other families needed, and working with families to help them not be like mine. And my family was still completely rejecting the fact that I was a man and would not call me my name, had never said my name, not once, would not use my pronouns, and we were going out in public and, I'm looking like this. So it was very uncomfortable, and really it got to the point where it was toxic for me to be around them. So I ended up having another older couple who I now kind of call like my second parents. They said, Lucas, come live with us. So fortunately, I was able to go live with them in their mother-in-law suite until I was able to reach a point where I could afford to live on my own. And so that was really hard for me, really difficult for me. And ultimately, something around that time, I think mainly creating that distance from my family and kind of giving them that ultimatum that, hey, I've worked this whole time to meet you in the middle, to accommodate your, discomfort with who I am, and I can't do it anymore. And so ultimately they ended up coming around. So I do have a happy story there, but there's still a lot of trauma with that in it. In just like, they act like they're, these amazing people because they allow me to be in their life as who I am, right? But ultimately they're not supporting me, right, or advocating on my behalf, but they think, they can pat themselves on the back. So love my family. They're nothing, they're good people, but they didn't have the resources that they needed to support me or to know how. And so, they were doing what they thought they had to do to protect me. And so by telling me, no, you cannot be this because this is wrong, right? So my whole church rallied against me. I was kicked out of it. I was not allowed to come. I was in so many things in that church, and I was completely removed, not allowed to come to that church anymore. Meetings all about me, like how are we going to change me? So it was a big mess. So fortunately, I did not experience being homeless. I had someone who was able to take me in. But working at Metro, like Carvelle said, I had so many clients who, were experiencing homelessness. It was really honestly difficult sometimes to go to work and take those calls because it's really, it took a real toll on my mental health to know that there really are not any resources that exist that I could provide them with that were going to give them, subsequent housing. And so that was really difficult, but I did. Almost all of our clients at Metro would refuse to go to a shelter. And I'm not gonna lie, I would often, stay up at night wondering if, the next day they were gonna, be there at their appointment with me, because that's the reality of the world that we live in. So.
Thank you so much, Lucas. What about you, Abby? What was your journey to living authentically?
So there are some that could say that I'm not. And let me preface that by saying I am out personally, I'm out professionally, amongst my colleagues and peers. Everyone knows who I am. They know that my pronouns are they, them. They know that I'm trans and genderqueer. I am out with my spouse, my husband, and my friends. But unfortunately, because of my family, because of where I come from, I grew up in West Central Illinois. When you think podunk folks from the backwoods, that's my family. Quite literally, I grew up on a working farm in Illinois. So I come from an immense amount of privilege, being white, being raised in an upper middle class home, having access to higher education, and yet I am only 2 generations removed from active members of the KKK. So, yeah. So I can't be out to my family because it is a matter of life and death. So my family is 1,600 miles away, and they will stay 1,600 miles away, and unfortunately, I can't be myself to them. And what that means for my journey, the most difficult part of living authentically is trauma. Now, there is inherently trauma in being trans. We live in a cisgender normative society, right? So society is designed for people who are cisgender and for those who are binary. So anything beyond that, any of us that exist outside of that black and white, those little boxes, right? There is trauma that exists in walking through the world. And so unfortunately, that's been the most difficult piece of my journey, is that it is traumatic to be myself. But I wouldn't choose to be anything else, because it is a matter of life and death to not be myself and to be able to walk through the world as myself. Like Lucas said, thank you. Thank you, God. Like Lucas said, being someone who works in the field as well, I specialize in serving trans and gender diverse adults. So 85% of my caseload, my therapy clients, are also trans and gender diverse folks, or those exploring their gender. And it's hard, especially in COVID, where we've noticed that folks are having to stay with folks out of survival, either unsupporting family, spouses, friends who aren't really supportive. People are having to resort to survival sex work more because they're unable to access employment, or they're unable to access safe employment. And it's difficult to go into work every day. And I work for myself, so I don't have a boss to go and talk to. I don't have anyone else to go and support the work that I'm doing within my company. So I'm going and I'm listening to folks who are experiencing the same things or similar things to what I am. And that is probably the most difficult part of living authentically.
Well, thank you so much for sharing. And I just want to say thank you for being here. Thank you. Even though you can't be out to your family, you're out to us, and we're your chosen family, and we're here for you. So Absolutely. We're happy you're here. So as we see this slate of anti-LGBTQ bills, one particularly, the License to Discriminate in Healthcare bill, I want to ask my panelists, starting with you, Carvelle, what has been your experience accessing healthcare? Because I know for trans and non-binary folks, it gets real tricky. So what has been your experience?
Well, yeah, like when I first started the transition, there was actually a website, I don't know if it's still around, but I had to revert to getting black market pills, but not like it was actually, you can buy this at Four Corners Pharmacy online. Yeah, you remember, so like that. So, But going back to piggybacking about services, like even there's certain nonprofits, like I'll call them out, AHF, that when I first started coming out, it was difficult to just even get an appointment, or even when you finally do get an appointment, you try to get the pharmacy. I don't want to disparage that organization. They're a great organization, but I'm just saying there should be more of that. And then my personal experience was it took me to be my personal advocate to get through care resources, HF, and then setting those appointments. But I know plenty of girls that they don't want to go through the red tape. They don't want to go through the bureaucracy. They just want instant result, and that leads to a dangerous road to, you can understand, like black market surgery, stuff like that. So every aspect of our lives is affected. I mean, there's our health, our shelter, every employment, opportunity to just grow. I mean, so that my personal experience, it was a long journey, but fortunately, there's more and more resources. There's a company called Phlox. Yeah, you heard of it. Yeah, Phlox. They're a good company. I'm not trying to plug them or anything like that, but I'm just giving you an example that there's a lack of resource, and healthcare is one of them.
What about you, Lucas?
Yeah, definitely. I can tell you that my journey in healthcare has not gotten easier, and might not ever, because of working in it. So, when I first started, I was driving, an hour and a half, and people were driving much further than that to see the one doctor in the central area, and when he got sick and wasn't able to treat us anymore, there was meetings, like town halls, about, well, who's going to take all these patients? It's simple. We just need you to monitor their blood work. Like, it's simple. Like, just, can someone please take these patients? And no one would do it. I mean, this was years. I went 3 years without my blood work even being drawn, and they were just refilling my prescription, which is fine, and I needed that prescription, but I ended up having some major health issues because my testosterone ended up being way too high. And, I had health issues when I was a very healthy person that could have been managed, right? Could have been avoided, right? And I'm sure others were just not being able to get access to their prescriptions at all. So, doctors finding options for surgeries, if you wish to opt into surgery, if you can afford surgery, if you can access surgery, even if you're at that point, even finding surgeons is difficult. Don't even get me started on the cost. It's unmanageable for almost every single person that I know, and insurance is improving, but not enough and not quick enough. And even if you have insurance that covers XYZ, getting XYZ covered is very challenging. So I used to help our clients navigate all of these processes, and it was very challenging and very frustrating for them. So that being said, I have a really great doctor now whom I love. He's like the only doctor that I know that I can see outside of people who I worked with before, or at the time worked with and wasn't able to see. And then the biggest challenge for me right now is mental health care. So finding a therapist who I can see, obviously I can't go to Abbie. Abbie's like my best friend, right? I can't go to anyone that I worked with at Metro. I can't go to, so, finding a therapist who's going to be able to treat me, but understand me and be respectful and really know who I am as a trans person has been nearly impossible, especially when my insurances keep changing, right? So very grateful to have insurance, but it's a big hurdle, right? So yeah, my challenge continues, unfortunately, because of working in the field and having that like conflict of interest, right, added on because of my relationships with working with all of these providers. But for people in general, the community in general, it continues to be an issue regardless.
No, thank you so much for sharing that.
Can I just add on
Yeah.
to some of what Lucas was saying? You know how you said there's even when you do get health care, my personal experience was you even get the reverse type of discrimination. I mean, for me, where you don't get the labs and you don't get your medicine. You don't get, like, I personally have experienced that countless times where I went for labs and they're saying, oh, we didn't get your labs, or your labs got lost or something like that. And it's not like just once or twice or thing like that, or getting denied prescriptions too. So that's even another hurdle too, being a black trans woman too. So you have health discriminations and it's coming from in every aspect. And then top it off, you have transphobic. Yeah, so getting hit on every side right there. So, but I just want to add that.
I just want to add a quick example that I forgot that's important, I think, is I've had doctors, like a doctor who was fully capable of monitoring my blood work. You know, I started to go to her to do primary care. I'm just going to say this. Her husband was on our board at Metro when I worked there. And she said to me, I can't do your hormones. That's too exotic. This was like just a few years ago. I never went back to that doctor. She also was uncomfortable when I had my shirt off, as she instructed for me to get in the whatever for a physical exam. Uncomfortable, physically uncomfortable when she walked in the room and I didn't have my shirt on. Like, I'm a man. like every other guy would have their shirt off. Why were you uncomfortable with that? So, yeah.
No, you both bring up a great point. It's competent healthcare. Competent healthcare providers and medical providers. It's one thing to say on your website that you can care for trans and non-binary people, but can you truly? Do you understand us? Do you understand the care that we need? And a lot of folks really don't. So thank you so much for bringing up those. What about you, Abbie?
So I can speak to this from two sides, both as a healthcare provider and as a genderqueer person who has sought care. And my husband is also a binary trans man, and I have his consent to share that as well. In a nutshell, it's been a nightmare. As a genderqueer person, I exist in this very strange liminal space where I can walk through the world and access cis spaces if I need to, even though I'm visibly queer, like there's something queerish going on. I can still walk through those spaces if I need to. That being said, I've been to medical providers who said, well, I have to treat you as your assigned sex at birth, as an excuse to not use my pronouns, as an excuse to not respect me. Obviously, I know that you, as my providers, they need to know my assigned sex at birth, they need to know what organs I have, they need to know what my hormone balance is in order to effectively treat me. That is not, however, an excuse to call me she, he, it, a patient, which was an experience I had this past year with a provider here in the Tampa Bay. Now, much of trans healthcare, we find our providers through word of mouth. Who's been safe? What's been your experience? How are they with binary folks? How are they with non-binary folks? Do they actually provide hormones? Are they operating on an informed consent model? Or do you have to jump through $500 worth of hoops before they'll actually provide you care? And so this provider, who misgendered me in so many flourished ways, was actually a well-known provider in the area who had been vetted by folks by word of mouth. He's actually my husband's provider. My husband, who is a binary trans man who walks around with a beard, who gets called boss in public, which is adorable because he's 5'2". Yeah. Gets treated respectfully, is called by his name and pronouns by this provider. The provider doesn't have a problem. What he has a problem with is me, because I don't fit in a neat and tidy box. I've also had this experience with dental providers. Now, as a dentist, you really don't need all of that information, like, just deal with this. But what we know about dental care is that our dental care is incredibly important for our neurological care and our cardiac care. If we're neglecting our dental care because we don't feel safe, we don't have a dentist who is safe, or in my experience last year, you have a dentist who quite literally misgenders you 20 times in the span of 10 minutes, while you are laid back in the chair and they are looming over you, it makes you want to avoid care. It makes it feel as though those healthcare circumstances are not safe. So that has largely been my experience, as well as having providers who, for my husband, said, oh, I'm trans affirming. They and put it on their website. And we went, and our experience was absolutely traumatic, absolutely horrible. And I was put in the position as his spouse and as a healthcare provider to have to advocate on his behalf for him to get his needs met. And Lucas can attest to this. He was there through the process. It's a nightmare, truly. Speaking on the healthcare side of things, it's also a nightmare for those of us who are trans healthcare providers, because our NPI, the national provider number that you're given as a provider, they only offer binary options, and they conflate gender and sex. So they only give you the options to select M or F. Even though in Florida we don't have an X option for gender marker, for folks in states who do, they don't have the option. They still have to select a binary marker. Many things auto-populate off of this. So for example, I'm in the process of applying for insurance panels. Those insurance panels automatically populate as female. All of the information populates based on my sex assigned at birth. And for those folks who do have access to change their gender markers, what that means is as they're becoming a provider, as they're trying to take insurance, because let's be real, most healthcare isn't affordable, and they're trying to increase accessibility for their community, they are further being traumatized in the process of trying to increase accessibility. So it is flawed on both sides.
Oh, Abbie, thank you so much for sharing that. I'm going to switch gears a bit, and I'll start with you, Carvelle. Do you feel the LGBTQ community as a whole stands behind us trans and non-binary people?
Oh, no, that's kind of a tricky question. I say yes and no, and we can all do better in this room too. My personal experience is that in my community in Wilton Manors, that it is there. We're trying. There's a undertone of, I will say, racism a little bit towards Black trans. And I won't say which only. I'm just saying from my experience with that. But it's been, when I say subtle racism, subtle, there's discrimination that I face, such as like when you go to, like, even going out to the club where you have people just snark or say, oh, here's the girls. There's this, I don't know what we're talking about, but you can add Lucas for that.
Yeah, definitely. So I would say your answer with yes and no was accurate, and not to shame, anyone. We can always, all of us can always do better in a lot of, things that we can advocate for in our lives, right? I would say that my experience has been, there are members of the community that, are not trans, right? But, LGB plus, who want to do well. They show up, they advocate. That's great, most of which are like my closest friends. But the majority of the time, I don't feel that support from the general community. I have had many experiences where even at like large events or, things like that, there is very inherent like transphobia, just lack of inclusion in general. There are prides, not mentioning any prides, but there are several that are extremely, extremely whitewashed, pretty much all cis gay men, like we need to do better, we need to acknowledge, right? Like the grand marshals that we're acknowledging, they need to be diverse. We cannot continue to just, acknowledge the white gay male who owns a business, right? That's fantastic. But there are people doing this work like Carvelle, right? And I didn't even know you own your own bike shop, right? That's huge, right? Who should be grand marshals of, of events like this? So that's just one example of something that I'm that's irritating my brain at the moment with something. But in general, I think that we all need to do, there is a space that needs to be held, that needs to be represented by the rest of the community to come in and say, this is not okay. We are losing our siblings, to violence at astronomical rates, increasing every year. And the trans community alone cannot stop that. And, we've been fighting for ourselves, and we always are fighting for ourselves and advocating for ourselves because we don't have another option. But we need the rest of the community to back us up because we are a large and strong and proud community, right? So we need more people to show up and to support and to have our backs, right?
I want to piggyback on that, on the having our back. So there are opportunities that folks oftentimes don't realize. So great example, in this event, are the bathrooms gender neutral? Because if not, that would put me in a position where I would have to choose, where do I go? So those are things that oftentimes are not thought of. And when we talk about we need allies and we need people to stand up and we need people to, if anybody's inquired, to sustain the note for us for staggered breathing, what that also means is listening to the community and not just listening to one or two or three voices, but listening to a vast array of voices within the community. Because Two non-binary people are not going to have the same experience. Two Black trans women are not going to have the same experience. So we need to listen to multiple voices of the multitude across the community. There needs to be no about us without us, right? So being included not only at the table, but in the advocacy work. Is this okay? Checking in with the community. Does this feel safe? Are we supporting your voices in the way that you want to be heard? In terms of the community, I will echo what Lucas and Carvelle said with, there's room. And the biggest thing that I get as a genderqueer or non-binary person is even within the trans community, non-binary and genderqueer, gender diverse folks are told that we are negatively impacting the capacity for binary trans folks to get access to rights, as though we are further being othered, as the whole trans community has previously been othered to the cisgender LGBTQ plus movement, right? That trans folks potentially negatively impacted the rights of gay, lesbian, bisexual, and queer folks to be able to get rights. So noticing how those trans-based, non-binary-based biases exist in those spaces. As a therapist, I have to say, question your implicit biases. If you notice something, notice it, and ask yourself why. Sit with it. It's okay to be uncomfortable, and then go and find the resources. Something that Lucas and I had also talked about is if you're going to folks to consult with them, if you're going to listen to trans voices, pay us for our time. Pay folks for their lived experience.
No, thank you so much. And, you know, I have been told straight to my face that the trans and non-binary community is holding us back as a whole. I have been told this straight to my face. And I kind of looked at the person and I said, can you elaborate? I was very taken back, and they just felt that, you know, L, G, and B are sexualities and T is gender, and they just went into this whole thing, and it's going like right over my head because I'm boiling. Because at the end of the day, it's like, well, then where do we fit in? Like, we're human, we want to be with everybody else, and, you know, the heterosexual community looks at us trans folks as, I don't even have to go there. And then sometimes we feel rejected by the LG and the B community, you know, so my next question, and I'll throw it to anybody, is in what ways do you wish folks would show up? And one thing that I want to start off with is in your committees, on your boards, in your groups, if you don't see trans or non-binary people there, invite them. I promise we can advocate for ourselves. We can be an asset to your group, to your committee, to your board. And, you know, especially in the nonprofit sector, we often see that there is cisgendered gay men who will advocate for everybody. But we are such a diverse community, and there are more than 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 people that can advocate for their communities. So please look at your boards and your committees and say, I don't think we have anybody who's trans or non-binary, and invite those voices in, and I guarantee you, you will be pleasantly surprised. So I would love to throw to anybody who wants to jump in. What are some ways that you wish folks would show up for us?
Sure. So as I mentioned, thinking about the barriers in which people are unable to access your spaces. If it's that your space is predominantly only available during certain times of day, if you don't have bathroom facilities, if your bathroom facilities use those signs that are like a mermaid and a centaur, please don't. So considering the barriers that folks have in order to be able to access your space, we want to be there. We want our voices to be heard, because we also want you to hear our voice and to stand beside us.
Yeah, to be an ally, just be there, like checking in with checking in with us. I mean, just being there. Yeah, just piggyback on what you said. Yeah.
And I would say, like, pay attention. You know, things happen around us all the time. You know, if you see a trans person being, you know, misgendered or mistreated, say something about it. You know, like it's not safe a lot of times for most of us to stick up even for ourselves. You know, if I was in a situation, or I'm going to use Abbie as an example, if Abbie were in a situation and not feel safe, like that, you know, maybe is not an LGBTQ plus welcoming environment, and for some reason they have to be in that space, and that somebody is misgendering them, right? I know that if they're uncomfortable, they're not going to say something because they might not feel safe, right? But if I'm there, I'm going to use my privilege and be like, this is my friend Abbie. Abbie uses they, them pronouns. Like, can we be cool here, you know, like, and advocate for them to stop misgendering them, right? And if that doesn't stop, we're gonna leave, you know? So you might be in a situation where you literally see a stranger, right? And someone's just being mistreated, say something. Don't just sit there, because by sitting there and being silent, you're adding to the problem, right? But otherwise, just showing up, you know, showing up and speaking, but also be cautious. Don't speak on our behalf, right? You can't, if you don't have the trans experience, you can't speak on your experience as a trans person if you're not a trans person. But, you know, take the space, you know, utilize your voice to speak up for trans people, and when possible, make spaces for us to be there to share our experiences and you know, widespread that education.
What's the saying? A voice of silence is a voice for the oppression?
Yes, yes, that's what I was trying to say. Thank you.
Absolutely. Abbie, I'm going to throw this one to you. What's one thing you wish people knew about trans and non-binary people?
We just want to live our lives. We are not out living our authenticity in an effort to get attention, in an effort to be too much. We are trying to occupy the space that is ours to step into, existing as truly in ourselves as we possibly can. People don't choose to be trans. We don't choose trauma. I wouldn't choose this for anyone if it were up to me, and yet this is my truth. And so holding that if someone is living out and they're living their true authenticity, giving them the chance to do that. Also understanding that when trans people come out, that oftentimes means going through a second puberty, whether they're taking medical transition or medical interventions or not. So if you think back when you all went through puberty the first time, it might have been a little bit of a shit show, pardon my language. So understanding that as we are coming to understand ourselves, as trans folks are learning to navigate how they walk through the world in their authentic self, giving folks a little bit of grace and space to learn, how do I embody myself in this world and how do I fit in this space?
What about you, Lucas?
Yeah, I'm gonna say, you know, I always tell people, like, and it sounds so simple, but we don't wrap our heads around it, right? And Carvelle actually kind of hinted at this earlier. It's like, we're human too. You know, I used to joke that, you know, they let me out of my cage every once in a while and I eat real food, you know, because that's how I was treated. It was like when people didn't understand, or when I was the only trans person they knew, they didn't even know how to address me. They would talk about my body in a way that was disgusting and dehumanizing, and we don't talk about their bodies like that, so why are they talking about mine, right? And also, they don't know anything about my body. They have not seen it, right? So I would say that, you know, understanding that we are, like Abbie said, just trying to be ourselves. We have the right, just like everybody else does, to live our lives authentically and to be here, because if I wasn't living my life as a man, I would not be here anymore. I would not have survived. I could not survive another day in that lie. I was so uncomfortable that I hated my life. I literally hated my life. And I don't think anybody understands how real that is for a lot of us. And unfortunately, that's why we lose people to suicide so often, especially when they don't have the support that they need. And that has been way too real in my life. And I mean, I have lost like one of my best friends to suicide because they did not have any support from their family. And that was the number one thing they wanted. And their family could never come around. So just understanding that, like Abbie had mentioned, you know, we get, people say things to us that are just wild. And my sister, when I first came out, told me, well, I don't know what group you're trying to fit into. Friend, there's no group. There was no one when I came out. I was the only person I knew who was trans. And I would not choose to make my life more difficult. No one would choose that. It's not fun. And it certainly wasn't fun when I came out. So we don't choose to make our life more challenging.
What about you, Carvelle?
I know I'm a little bit tired today, so forgive me. We have a 4-hour drive, but no, it just, this piggyback when you said, Lucas, I mean, my personal experience, like, there's countless times where I felt that I don't fit anywhere. I don't fit. I'm not. There's times I felt I'm not black enough. I'm not gay enough. I'm not trans enough. I'm not anything like that. That's my personal experience. I went through it like that, and then it's just we just have to treat us as human beings. Just treat us, that's it. That's as simple as that. That's all.
No, absolutely. And I think, one thing I want people to understand is that there's not one way or a right way to be trans. Listen, however you express yourself is valid. However you choose to be is valid. Some people choose to go through a physical transition. Some people choose to go through a medical or a legal transition, or some choose not to, and that's okay. You don't have to fit into a box or look a certain way, or this word that I hate, passing. Don't worry about passing, worry about living authentically, because we have one life to live, and that's it. You know what I mean? So that's what we should worry about. So the last question, we talked a little bit about this, but I'm going to throw it to whoever wants to speak on it. Allies often ask, how can allies be better? How can we be better allies? What can we do? One thing I always say is challenge your friends and family. And what I mean by that is we've all been around somebody who has said, oh, those trans people, or oh, this, or oh, that. But I challenge you all to ask them next time, why do you think that way? Have you ever met a trans person? Because a lot of the times when someone sees you looking at something differently, that can make the light bulb go off for them to see something differently. So for me, I would definitely say challenge it, and not necessarily in a confrontational way, but just have an open conversation, open dialogue with someone who maybe doesn't understand the trans or non-binary experience, and that can move us so much forward. So anyone want to join in on that?
Talk less, listen more. And listen not to respond, but to hear.
I'm gonna say that you don't even know the impact of just something, even just something small that you say to somebody, especially like our peers and our friends. So, say you're at lunch with somebody and they say something transphobic, or they say something that, they don't understand this or that, right? By you responding in a positive way about that community and educating them, or maybe they said something ignorant or offensive and you shut it down, that's gonna stick with them. Like if I always joke like two guys, like buddies are out, right? Like somebody says, oh, that's gay, or that's something. If the other guy says back to him, that's not cool. Like, don't say that. That's disrespectful, right? He's not gonna say that again. He doesn't want his friend to think he's a jerk, right? Unless he's just a horrible person. So, it's just an example, right? Like, that's how we communicate with our friends most of the time, right? And even with a stranger, you don't know, especially with a stranger, you might have an impact on them that's like, oh, wow, this person just told me not to say that. I don't want to be disrespectful or rude. And that sticks with you. It sticks with them, and then maybe they share that with somebody else, right? Those small little seeds we're planting, that's how we make change and educate more people on experiences of people that they just maybe have not ever learned about before, right? Or met anybody.
I want to piggyback really quick. And you also don't know who's listening. You don't know what trans kid, non-binary kid who's out with their unaffirming family. You don't know your server's gender identity, and maybe they've been rejected by everyone else. And hearing you speak up, stand up, say something means that they feel like, oh, there might be a place for me in this world, because we have a lifetime suicide attempt rate of 40% in the trans community. Anything that folks can do to mitigate that harm, we're here for.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. So now we're going to switch to some questions. I would love to hear yours.
All right. Hello, I'm Kyle Turner, and I'm with the Dolphin Democrats. I'm new with them, and I'm very excited to be here. A comment and then a question. Back when I was supporting a presidential candidate, I was introduced to a Black trans woman of color. She is a singer, songwriter, and her name is Shia Diamond. I don't know if you've heard of her, but she has the most beautiful music in the world, and I would like for everyone to acknowledge who she is and listen to her. She was incarcerated for 10 years, and she lived her life as a woman before that incarceration. That's her story, and I'll leave that with you. The other thing I want to better understand is if you have a thought process, children who maybe have yet to reach puberty, the care that they might be able to receive. If you could just elaborate on that and the importance of that.
So I'll jump in as a healthcare provider. So there are a couple things. The first thing is that pre-puberty, transition is social. What that means is using the name, using the pronouns that they're asking you to use. Gender exploration, identity exploration is a normal part of childhood development. Social transition also means if they want a haircut, if they want to go shop in a different section of the store, if they want to use toys that might not be necessarily congruent with the sex they were assigned at birth. You're giving them the space to exist. Another option for prepubertal children is puberty blockers. And so oftentimes we hear, oh, the blockers, and they're terrible. They quite frankly act like a plug in a bathtub. Essentially what they do is they flood the hormone receptors, so the hormone receptors are paused. Puberty blockers were actually created for cisgender children who are experiencing precocious puberty. So we're not talking about something that was created specifically for trans and non-binary children to cause harm. What we're talking about is something that was designed for cisgender children that we have adapted to give folks time and opportunity to develop their identity and to determine who they are. The beauty of puberty blockers, much like a plug in a bathtub, is when you pull the plug, it starts all over again. So if that means that individual starts on gender-affirming hormone therapy, then they would start on cross-sex hormone therapy. If that means, nope, we're gonna go ahead and have a natal puberty that's consistent with their bioavailable hormones, what's naturally produced in their body, so be it. But for prepubertal children, that's all we're talking about. They are not getting surgeries. They're not getting hormone therapy. Hormone therapy is not recommended until age of 14, which is actually ideal because then kiddos are starting their puberty the same time as their peers. It's not like we're putting them on a high enough dose that they're gonna look like a lumberjack or they're gonna look like, you know, America's Next Top Model tomorrow. They're gonna be at the same pubertal level as their same age peers. So it's more developmentally appropriate medically and also socially. It's so hard to fit in that prepubertal teen age. And so timing things out like that means that folks have the opportunity to fit in with their peers.
Awesome, thank you so much. Yeah.
Hi, my name is Robin Witt. I'm with the Rainbow Democrats in Orange County. And I wrote my stuff down because, it's a surprise to many in this room, I actually get stage fright. The first thing I wanted to say is with reference to being trans enough is like, it took me as long as I did to come out as trans because I didn't think I was trans enough. I didn't think that I could be out and successful, especially in my career in engineering. It's, so that's just a thought I had. And the other thought I had, I don't really have any questions, so
I just want to jump in. Trans imposter syndrome is a well-known phenomenon.
Yep. Oh yeah. And so the other thing I wanted to say is, when y'all were talking about whether or not the wider LGBTQ plus community supports us or not, so there's a reason why trans rights are 20 years behind LGBT plus rights, and I always get kind of nervous, a little apprehensive around other LGBT plus people in politics, especially when they've been active since the 70s, the 80s, the 90s. And it hurts knowing that, you know, we were left behind. We are 20 years behind, 30 years behind because we were left behind. And knowing that there are LGBT plus people who, you know, have been working in politics, volunteering in politics since that time, you know, since Stonewall, it hurts knowing that some of the people I work with, the people that come up to me and say, thank you for doing what you do, you're so strong. And it hurts knowing that some of those people are the same people that left us behind. So that's just what I wanted to say.
Thank you so much for that.
Thank you.
Absolutely. Hi.
Hi, I'm Peter Imhoff from Sarasota. I had a quick question for Abby and Luke. For those of us who live in redder areas, less friendly areas, we don't have those resources, especially for healthcare. And so for members of our caucuses or us ourselves, are there any resources or any reference guides that we can maybe point individuals to for trans affirming or non-binary affirming healthcare, especially in mental health? Because I found a lot of people are saying they're LGBT friendly or trans affirming, and then you have a conversation with them and they're clearly not. Thank you.
There's one guide that I don't know how it's been updated, and I also know that Equality Florida, y'all redid it again, right? Okay, so Equality Florida has a guide. What is it called?
The Trans Resource Guide.
Trans Resource Guide, sorry. So very simple. I don't know why I couldn't remember that. I was going to make it much more complicated than that. That you can find on their website, so the Trans Resource Guide by Equality Florida. There's also a broader one, and I honestly, I don't think it's been updated in a while. I think they actually maybe were even redoing it, and maybe it didn't exist for a minute. So hopefully there's a new one out now. I'm not sure. It's called Trans in the South, or is that what it's called? And they actually have like all of the like southern states, so even more than Florida. There used to be a pretty extensive list on Florida. Keep in mind you're gonna have to do some of your own research, because if it is old, people change, people are no longer in practice, etc. But those are some pretty robust guides to start with. The Trans in the South one, as well as the Trans Resource Guide at Equality Florida, breaks it down into different types of care. I think they even include like HIV care providers on there, things like that. So they have mental health, they have hormone providers, primary care, that types of things. So check those two out. But I don't know if Abby knows any more, or if you know any more.
My 2 cents, contact one of us directly. Because any of the directories for mental health, Psychology Today is the big one, right? There are a number of directories, Rad Remedy, Trans in the South, Equality Florida Trans Guide. Folks can self-submit. Or if one trans person has a great experience, they can submit that information. That doesn't necessarily mean that that person is safe for the whole of the community. So I have referral lists that I maintain, medical providers, hormone therapy providers, mental health providers who I would refer to, and those are people who I would trust with my own care.
I will say very, very quickly, the Trans Resource Guide that we have at Equality Florida, in about 2 weeks, we're putting out our next update, and I've had somebody go through and check every single one in there, so everything is super updated.
I would also caution that those directories aren't vetted, like asking actual questions about how they address trans folks and asking how trans providers rate them. That's where there sometimes is a discrepancy where folks will self-submit, but they're not, yeah.
It's a good start to do your research.
Absolutely.
Just a couple of things really quick. I want to thank you all for your bravery and for what you are doing today to empower us. So the first people to stand up at Stonewall were the trans community. So I just want to acknowledge that.
Thank you.
And for anyone who needs her as a resource, I want to mention Ashley Brundage. She's the Director of Diversity and Inclusion for PNC Bank, and she has a new book out and program called Empowering Differences. It's a phenomenal program, and I want to encourage anyone who needs it to share that resource as well. And I want to acknowledge Amy for her performance on Jeopardy. It was wonderful.
Absolutely.
Last thing, this is my question, sorry. I have a friend who is intersex, and I met her at Orlando Pride this past October. And she's experienced quite a bit in her life recently. Can you all, as a panel, speak to what the intersex community faces and how we can help uplift our brethren and sisterhood who identify as intersex?
So that would be a panel for intersex people.
Absolutely.
So we can't speak for them because that would be, but I would encourage you to visit interact.com or interact.org. That's an organization specifically run by intersex folks.
Okay, thank you.
And also way more intense discrimination in healthcare. So.
Hi.
Hi, friends. Nathan Broomer, he, him pronouns. My question is this. Why or why not? Why are trans folks advocates publicly or not? And I think that's a question that you all understand why I'm asking you that question, right? So you each have very different, beautiful perspectives, and we're probably short on time, so you can wrap that also into your call to action closing comments, perhaps. Thanks.
I'll be quick. So why is because, kind of like we alluded to earlier, like we have to. So I started doing this work because there were no resources that existed for me, and I was having to advocate for myself and educate all my friends and all my family. So that's why. Why I continue to do it is because I'm passionate about it and helping pave the way for other people who are coming behind me. And why not is because it's not safe. Tons of people will not get up on this stage. There are very few people who we can contact to ask to get up on a stage because we know they're comfortable, and we don't want to ask anybody who might not be comfortable. And it is because of safety. I hold a lot of privilege, which is why I can be, out in most places. And so there's that as well. But for most people, it could literally be life or death for them in certain contexts.
Real quick, besides being a photographer for Hotspots magazine, part of Happening Out, Florida Television Network, I'm also a full-time health educator for a large social service agency in ASO in Broward County. We have support groups and talk groups, discussion groups for addicts of every different drug of choice, for our positive people, for different people that are black men, youth. I can't find of any discussion groups for trans people, trans folks in our county. Are there, and if they're available to you, do you re-access them? I see there's a couple at Sunserve and Lanners. And it's important to have discussion groups, talk groups, support groups for trans folk. And if not, how can a social service agency help you do that?
I'm not familiar with the area, are you?
I would say Sunserve would probably be, your Carvelle.
You don't have to. No?
Okay, yeah.
I would say I don't think any of us know the area, so we can't answer the question per se, but I would say I'm sure that you could, and you're in that area, right? So I'm sure that you could maybe talk with Carvelle about, I'm not volunteering you, but you might be able to talk to...
It's something that I have to, it's something, I know he's getting, but it's something that I don't want to elaborate the answer without you for research. So,
yeah. But you might be able to reach out to people in your community who might have contacts that you could create one, is what I'm...
Oh, okay.
Yeah. No, they're definitely important. They have to be created, but you'd have to vet, people, find people in your community who are interested, who are trans, who are interested in being part of that conversation. But I'm not familiar with that area. I'm sorry.
I just want to say this to us as a caucus. You may have seen me move people. If you come up to this mic and a woman is up here, if you come up to this mic and someone is here and you have not heard their voice, I'm asking that you make space. That's what centering is. And so just be mindful of that as we come up, because we want to also hear from folks that we have not heard from. I also want us to think about, when we ask questions, to think about, are we tasking the folks most impacted by it to do that work? Because if it doesn't exist, then we need to create it. And so let's just be thoughtful as we do it, because it really highlights the work that we have to do. And so I will ask that as people come up, be mindful of whose voice hasn't been heard. If someone comes up to this mic who identifies as a woman or non-binary or BIPOC, to also create space in this caucus. Okay. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, I want to thank you all so much for allowing us to share space with you today. At the end of the day, whether you identify as LGBTQ+, particularly trans or non-binary, we are human. We just want to live authentically like everyone else. And I would be remiss if I did not mention the disproportionate rate of violence that Black trans women face in this world. So please diversify your boards, diversify your committees. If you've never met a trans person, I'm here, come meet me. So please just, we can all work together to make the world a better place. Thank you so much. Thank you to our panelists.
LGBTQ+ news is vital for our community and for the broader world as a whole. We have enough enemies at Fox News. Tucker, Sean, and Laura are loud. We need passionate allies. Happening Out Television Network, Queer News Tonight, and It's Happening Out are literally out of the closet and into the headlines. Our community needs your support. Like this broadcast and subscribe now to ensure the growth of the entire LGBTQ+